So thanks so much, Melissa. It's great to have your group of panelists here, and thanks for everyone who's got an interest in this and coming out to learn more today. We'll be joined shortly by my colleague in government, April Baskin. We have Clifford Bell, a former Buffalo Common Council member, but that really is just the tip of the iceberg with Cliff. There's a lot more going on there. So thank you, Brother Bell, for being here today. Dr. Barbara Seals-Nevergold, we've done a lot of work together in the education space. Barbara's super active in the community. Think Uncrowned Queens Institute. Think her work on the school board. And Julia Bottoms, she's an artist who's known for many pieces of art, but we hope that she'll be most known for her Shirley Chisholm work. So we're really happy to have everyone here today. So we're here to discuss the legacy of an important historical figure who is connected to Buffalo, and some days we claim her as our own, and some days we don't. But I'd like to propose that we do start claiming Shirley Chisholm as a Buffalonian, and I think this will start it. So we'll be discussing her career as a legislator and her lasting impact on the political landscape. But let's give a little background. Shirley Chisholm began her career as an educator in Harlem, but she quickly found her way to the world of politics. In 1964, she was elected to the State Assembly. 4 years later, she became the first black woman to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. If you just think of that, from 1776 to 1968, not one African-American woman serving in Congress. It's hard to think that that's true, but unfortunately is. She was the second woman to serve in the House Rules Committee and the first African-American to do so. And probably most famously, in 1972, she became the first woman and the first black candidate to seek a major party's nomination for president. She ran for president, and my gosh, in 1972, that was an audacious undertaking on her part. So my first introduction to Shirley Chisholm was during that campaign. I was a small first grader, and I saw a poster of Shirley Chisholm in my aunt's bedroom. And back then, you know, if you closed your eyes, you had a very specific picture in your brain of what a leader of the United States could look like. And it was not like Shirley Chisholm, that's for sure. Nearly every politician that I was familiar with growing up were white men. And so I had this vivid memory still to this day when I saw that poster, but it opened my eyes as a very small child to say, wow, turns out a leader can look a lot of different ways. So if I had that reaction back in 1972, I could imagine what other kids throughout the country thought of when they looked at Shirley Chisholm. For the first time, they saw somebody who looked like them in a position of power. And that is a powerful thing. Shirley Chisholm was a trailblazer. She refused to let anybody tell her what box she belonged in. She did her own thing, but she set a precedent that she was not the last to do her own thing, not the last woman or person of color to enter into politics. So she opened doors and she paved the way for women of color to follow in her footsteps. But she's remarkable not only for the things that she did, but also the way that she led her life. You know, integrity and compassion went hand in hand with her. And we all know her slogan, right? When she ran, it was unbought and unbossed. And today, those words are actually inscribed in her final resting place at a mausoleum in Forest Lawn Cemetery. So even though she was a Brooklyn native, when she retired from politics, she realized that Brooklyn was not the place to be, but Buffalo was the place to be. And so she made her home in Buffalo. She married former Assembly member Arthur Hardwick Jr. They lived in Williamsville, had a long, pleasant retirement. But even today, most Western New Yorkers, they don't know that Shirley Chisholm had a connection to our region. A few years ago, and some of my colleagues in Brooklyn were talking about Shirley Chisholm, and she's from Brooklyn. I said, no, she's Buffalo. And they were like, she is not. What are you talking about? I said, where's Shirley Chisholm buried? Is she buried in Brooklyn? Is she buried in New York City? He said, she spent the rest of her end of her career and her life in Buffalo, and she's buried in Buffalo. And they were shocked to learn it. But we need to keep preaching that message. And the sort of mystery behind Shirley Chisholm is one of the reasons that I worked hard to find funding to put up a memorial statue. It's about time, that's for sure. It's about the right place and a time in American history to talk about Shirley Chisholm in a different way. And I think Buffalo should proudly claim her as one of our own. And we're looking forward to really next year when the statue will be installed in Forest Lawn. Because we all know Forest Lawn is a place where, people of note in the history of Buffalo are somehow represented. And Shirley's represented there in a very small way. It was the way that her and her husband wanted to be remembered at that time. So we put together a steering committee to make sure that Buffalo was properly represented, but also to figure out how the heck do we memorialize Shirley Chisholm. She has no family, there's no heirs, so there's no one from her side, her family, to say, hey, what do you think we should do? How would she like to be memorialized? So we worked together and thought of a collective way for Shirley to make an impact on Buffalo, but also had a visual representation. Melissa Brown, who you just heard from, she's dynamic, but she's one member of the committee. She helped us put the historic twist on things. And we have other members of our panel here tonight who you'll be hearing from. But we brought together Buffalonians from really diverse backgrounds to put their minds together on this. So after I've introduced them, I'm going to ask them to share a little bit about their connection with Shirley Chisholm and what this project means to them. Let's start with you, Dr. Nevergold. Can you tell us a little bit about what Shirley Chisholm means to you and your time in Buffalo? As I know you actually overlapped and interacted, so.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that you said in terms of her legacy, in terms of her contribution, and the fact of her motto, unbought and unbossed. There's another little piece of that says, fighting Shirley Chisholm, which I think really described the fact that not that she was combative necessarily, but she took no stuff, kind of. She was a very strong-willed woman. And I had the pleasure and the good fortune, my colleague and myself, Dr. Peggy Brooks Bertram, had the pleasure of meeting her in 1990 or so. Around that time, we actually had an organization called Concerned Parents and Citizens for Quality Education. And our goal with that organization was to teach parents about their rights, in terms of the school district, and to teach them a bit about the mechanisms and about the bureaucracy of the district so that they could navigate through the processes to advocate for their children. And we held this major rally, we thought, a major meeting at an organization on Main Street, and we invited her, and she came. We were really so surprised, but it was indicative of the way throughout her career where she supported families, where she supported education. You mentioned that she was an educator, and I think few people really know that she started off as a nursery school teacher. Mm-hmm. And then she became an administrator, and then from there, she became a consultant with the New York City Division of Children's Services. But so education was definitely ingrained in her background because this constituted about 20 years of her career before she began her political career. So I have great respect for her, and I will talk a little bit more about what she actually accomplished as a result of her legislative activities and engagement and contributions to education in the state and in the country.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Nevergold. Brother Bell, tell me a little bit about Shirley Chisholm, what she meant to you, and what do you think she means today?
Well, I didn't have a close relationship with Ms. Chisholm, but I did observe the effectiveness when she spoke. She was a very confident person. There was no question that she was a person that didn't mind being in charge because she had the ability to assume whatever responsibility was entailed with selecting that position. I knew that when she married Arthur Hardwick, it was her husband here, and he was a businessman. He was also the assemblyman, of course. He served 2 terms prior to being replaced by Hart Eve. That's the historical area that I kind of worked in. I wasn't involved in politics per se as a political person, but I was kind of a community person that observed people that were in political positions. And she held a great position of respect and dignity because she was an erect person that carried herself like a champion. If you can say that about a woman, they can be champions too. Because most guys think, well, if I stand up straight and I bark real loud, that people will be afraid of me. She had a different tactic. Her tactic was to get next to people to impress them with the ability to serve collectively for a common goal. That isn't easy. I went through that in politics a long time. Getting any number of people to agree on a common goal is almost a miracle. So I kind of respected her for that and respected the fact that she was always in the community. She was available. That wasn't a surprise to you because, even up till today, people invite the elected officials to something. If they show up, it's running time. If it isn't time for re-election, you may or may not get them there. But I think the most important thing about Shirley Chisholm was she was unrelenting with her pursuit for excellence. And she disregarded all those attempts to take her off track. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy today being black trying to get something done. I know how bad it was in her age because Brother Bell was born 1929. I'll be 93 this year. And I've seen the elephant fly. And they told me he didn't have no wings. And until Disney created Dumbo, that's the first time I saw an elephant fly. But I want you to know that it's especially important for someone who's breaking ice. When you start off from scratch, being number one, you feel good, I'm the first one, but after a while, it gets to be a weight that you get tired of carrying. I tell people, please don't give me anything else as an award. I don't want one. I'm doing my job. It's like giving a football player a trophy because he's a nice guy and playing football. That's his profession. When you get elected to a political office, that's your profession. That's your duty. That's your responsibility. So don't pretend you don't know what you're doing. If you don't, then you shouldn't be there. She was very impressive. And people paid attention to her. She would have never gone that far, that fast. You know how long they tried to get in a position to run for a major office? You can't hardly do it because those old guys, once we get in the office, we protect them like they're gold until we retire. That's what's happened today. She was new, she was brilliant, she was creative, and she cared. Her major focus was on families and children. Just a little bit more of that today would put her even in another category. So my memory of her wasn't as I could say, hi, Shirley. I knew her husband better because he owned a liquor store and had 3 delivery trucks right on the corner of Broadway and Hickory. You call him and he deliver it to you and register you. That's how they got elected. He was active, but until earlier when she showed up, he realized her ability, and they both had a relationship that was great. It was understanding, and he wasn't, even when he was elected out of office, they still were very close and maintained that relationship until the Lord took them apart. So that was my relationship. I was in a different situation. I didn't start running for office till the late 50s, and then I've been running until the 1956. It was my last time around. I went from there to Buffalo State College for 24 years. I'm now chairing a committee called BAM, Buffalo African American Museum. We are meeting now, and our goal is to construct in the city of Buffalo a museum featuring African Americans out of Buffalo or Buffalo and vicinity that created the kind of relationship and the development of the city of Buffalo. And this lady here is going to be one of our museum features when it gets open. So hang around, folk. Give us a couple, 3 years. But Brother Bell got a committee whose duty is going to be to put up a new, if we can, African American museum of some size, and you would be amazed. If you look at their operation, they're talking about institution stuff and kings and queens of Buffalo, there's a lot of top-rating African Americans that live and raise and work in Buffalo. We need to let our children know it, and everybody else in Buffalo say, I'm proud because Shirley Chisholm was here. All right?
That's great. And hopefully this will be part of the first steps for that, right?
Absolutely. I didn't mean to take a different curve, but I hope you understand. I'm talking about what I know. I'm not going to pretend I knew Shirley Chisholm. We had coffee together because it didn't happen.
That's why we have you here, for what you know. So let's go from the artistic perspective. You know, you different generation. What did you know of Shirley Chisholm before this started? And did you even know that there was connections to Buffalo?
Well, I definitely didn't have the pleasure or the honor of meeting Shirley Chisholm, which is kind of a challenge, I think, artistically for me, because a lot of what I do is I try to connect with the person that I'm painting and sort of like infuse that personality into it. But I have to say, I think her legacy is so unique in the sense of like, it's felt like I've had the opportunity to meet her just from hearing everybody like speak so highly of her and, you know, showing all the things that she's done and just like this incredible impact that she's had. I think that speaks volumes about like who she was for that to kind of translate through into what I'm doing, because I think usually it's a lot harder for me if I don't get to meet the person one-on-one, but for this I feel like it's almost like her, you know, her spirit's here a little bit. And as far as what she means to me, I think with Shirley Chisholm, it's interesting because I feel a parallel to her in the art world in the sense of, to be frank, we both existed in spaces where it's mostly older white guys. So in the fine arts world, it's very much that way. You see the galleries dominated by that. Even now, here in 2022, it's, you know, it's kind of crazy to me. But Shirley gives me hope and inspiration in the sense of she was able to knock down barriers and to say, you know, I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm going to make a way for myself in this path that I've chosen. And I think for me that's such a huge inspiration, and I can draw from that as well in my own field. And even just having the commission for this piece, I think, is in a way a historic thing. I don't know how many realist statues we have by Black female artists here in Buffalo, so I think it's an honor to me to be able to follow in her footsteps, but down my own particular way of doing it.
I think it's wonderful, and we're so excited to have you as part of this project. You know, we put out an RFP to say, you know, who's going to answer, who's going to be the artist, and we're so happy with. We had so many great responses, but one response really came to the top, and you know, it was yours. So we're so happy that you're a homegrown Buffalonian too. And I see Zainab's here. Zainab, thanks for your work and helping us curate this process to this point. So let's ask Legislator Baskin. We'll give you a sort of a two-fer question. You know, what was your thoughts of Shirley Chisholm? You know, not that anyone's expected to know where Shirley Chisholm, you know, her location in Buffalo, but you know, what did you think of her? But also, Shirley Chisholm often spoke about the interplay, like she was sort of a first twice. You know, she was often the first female, but also the first African American at the same time. And she talked about, you know, backlash and difficulties because, you know, because she dared to seek public office, and she was in a role where a lot of people, when they closed their eyes, they didn't see someone like her. And you know, Legislator Baskin, does your experiences holding public office as a woman of color, does the work that Shirley did earlier, does it still ring true today to you?
Yeah, very much so. I'll start off by asking everyone to pardon my tardiness. I'm event hopping this evening, but bring greetings to the Senator for leading the way on this project. All of our friends in the audience that are a part of the committee, Artist Julia, Brother Bell, for his wisdom and the guiding light that he's been in our community for consistently making sure that people have a connection to Black history. He himself, his life, his legacy, and his family really resonates with me personally in terms of just being able to achieve Black excellence in the city of Buffalo, and of course, Dr. Nevergold, for your leadership here as well. But to your question, Sean, yes, Shirley just makes me feel so normal. And I don't often get opportunities where I'm in spaces where I feel as though there are a lot of people that are like me, that think like me, that respond like me, that speak like me. Even at the volume that I speak sometimes, I think that there are so many things about being a woman of color, and then being in a space that is predominantly dominated by men that oftentimes, just to be transparent, makes me feel uncomfortable. But then I think of Ms. Chisholm and the time period in which she did things that were absolutely unthinkable, and it just gives me a sense of normalcy. So I really, really appreciate that. In terms of being the marginalized in a space multiple times over, sometimes I speak on panels and people are surprised when I say that my experience with facing discrimination happens in this order. It is first ageism, then it is sexism, and last it is racism. And everyone expects or assumes that sometimes, because of, especially right now, the sensitivity of racial injustice and how it's been heightened in our communities recently, that would be first. And I have no idea if I've just become accustomed to adjusting to racism because of the way that our society operates. But I definitely notice and feel that I'm everybody's sweetheart and such a good kid first. And then secondary, definitely I feel as though I am a woman, and I oftentimes feel as though that my voice is not heard, or there is not space for my voice to be elevated in spaces that I operate in elected office. And then, of course, being Black in this country has its challenges and its complexities. I actually have a quote from Shirley Chisholm 50 years ago on January 25th, 1972. Shirley Chisholm launched her unprecedented political campaign, and she started with these remarks. I stand before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman and I am equally proud of that. I am not the candidate of any political bosses or fat cats or special interests. I stand here now without endorsements from many big-name politicians or celebrities or any kind of prop. I do not intend to offer you the tried and the cheap, the cliches, which for too long have been an accepted part of our political life. I am the candidate of the people of America, and my presence before you now symbolizes a new era in American political history. So yes, I identify with Ms. Chisholm often, and I know that despite these words, she still dealt with being marginalized in that struggle, but I definitely feel that because of her, because of President Obama, you know, his famous quotes, there is no Black America, there is no white America, there is one America. I often try my best to just cleave to that, that wish. It's not a reality, but it's a wish. And I try to operate within that wish so that I can get through those hardships and serve people with excellence.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight, your feelings, your truth with us. It's an honor to hear you speak on this subject. So let's go to Dr. Nevergold. And Dr. Nevergold's an educator, but it seems a lot of educators, they don't stay in the classroom. They move out into community affairs. And Dr. Nevergold of course, has been involved in so many things in our community, but including, running for office herself. How do you think Shirley Chisholm's early career as an educator, how did it shape her legislative priorities? And what is it with educators? They seem to take a big role in our society outside of the education prism. I served with several educators in Albany. Shocking number of legislators were former school teachers. So what do you think there, Dr. Evergold?
Well, it's a good question. When we talked about Shirley Chisholm, let's go back to her for a minute in terms of being an educator, and how that shaped her legislative priorities. Again, because she was early childhood focused, I think that had certainly a lot to do with it. But she also, growing up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant area of Brooklyn, she grew up with poor people, and she could empathize with poor people. And so that was also part of her legislative agenda. And she put those together. And I know that people are familiar with the SEEK program, which is Seek, Education, Elevation, and Knowledge. And former deputy assemblyman of the New York State Assembly, Arthur O. Eve, is rightfully cited as being the father of the SEEK program, but to my surprise, Shirley Chisholm offered the legislation that set in place the SEEK program.
I did not know that.
Yes,
I didn't know that, yeah.
Yes, she did. And so, we'll call her the mother of the SEEK program. She spoke Spanish fluently. And this, again, helped her to reach out to people in her district, and certainly as she moved further out and became a national figure, she believed in coalition building, and that was important to bring people together to achieve a goal. So when I think about what educators do, we want to bring people together, we want to teach people, we want to elevate people, we want to inspire people. And that might not have been certainly a goal of hers, but as Julia said, and certainly I agree, and I know Legislative Bascom and Brother Bell here as well, she was an inspiration. She was a model for people. When I talked about meeting her and having her come and speak to the group that Peggy and I were advocating for, she did more than that. I forgot, she actually invited us to her home. And I remember going and talking to her, and her encouraging us, and I think educators, again, mentors. She was a mentor, and particularly to women, because, as Legislative Bascom said, is that she recognized, and she said as well, that she felt more discrimination as a result of her identity as a female than that of being a minority. Right? And she identified, it's called an intersection. She identified that earlier, before the term was even coined or recognized. And she, worked hard to help to elevate women, and later in later years, specifically African American women, because she felt that they were more marginalized, more so than every other group, and that they were not given the attention, they were not given the respect that they deserved. And so in those years after she retired from Congress, she went out and she mentored many of the women candidates who were running for political office across this nation. We've talked about bringing in Representative Barbara Lee to help us to unveil this statue. And Barbara Lee was a very close confidant of Mrs. Chisholm's. When she was a student in California, she actually headed up the California campaign for Mrs. Chisholm when she ran for president. And in return, Shirley Chisholm was her mentor. But she mentored many other African-American women. So as an educator, we often are also mentors, individually, but also as a group. So I think I probably have, I hope I've answered your question.
I think you have. I think you
I don't
have.
want to go on and on and on.
Even all her mentoring was, I would view that as an outshoot of her being a teacher.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
really incredible. So when I think of, Shirley Chisholm, running for higher office, I sort of view it through my prism of, what I know about history, but it's infected by today, right? So, Brother Bell, could you help us put some context on what was it like in 1972? What was going on, in America, in New York State, when Shirley Chisholm said, I'm going to run for president of the United States of America? Did the country open their arms and say, thank God, it's about time?
Well, let me first of all say that any one of us that have been out here in the community trying to do things to help community be in better shape are standing on someone else's shoulders.
That's right.
It's without question that there are a lot of people that are standing on Shirley Chisholm's shoulders just based on what they've read. One of the unfortunate features is we haven't focused enough on some of our heroes that have done all these outstanding things to the point where our children know nothing about them. Mm-hmm. That is another reason we're promoting this museum with such great enthusiasm, so that we can feature these people. And a part of our plan is this have this become a part of the curriculum of the city of Buffalo, and we're already working in communication with the Buffalo History Museum here. Beautiful people who are willing to work and have the facilities that can really assist us in making this a realistic thing. That is where the relationships with people come in. Pride, dignity in relationships. The trouble with us today that she was working on as a major cross for her to bear was communication. Because how can you dislike or distrust someone that you don't even know? It cannot be you look at them and say, oh, they're a person of color, so I'm not going to pay any attention to them. That's why she was so effective, because when they did listen to what she had to say, they could understand this woman is ready for prime time, and that really we should give her some help. The politics in those days, it was a big common council. It had 15 people, 5 at large, a president, and 9 district people. That's like too many people. So they took 2 of those outlier guys out of there. I thought they waited until I got through, and then they took them. So I said, yeah, you can do that. That's what all the big guys do. But anyway, the major thing here, folks, is very simply, we're recognizing someone who deserves recognition, should have been recognized before now, should be in the books as a feature of information for people to read when talking about the United States of America and its history. There's a lot of roles we played, but the most prominent role for which we've been recognized is slavery. But this sister took us above another hurdle and said, recognize me because of my intelligence, my integrity, and my fluency. And they did. She'd been a few years later, she probably could have come pretty close to winning, but she didn't. But the main thing is, you got the politics in Buffalo then, and then I'll quit. They've always been discriminated in such a way that you had different races living in certain sections that were represented by people who were of the same race living in certain sections. In Buffalo today, the West Side is still Italian. Irish are still in, yeah. And African Americans in Ellicott and Maston. And so you can almost identify the outcome of an election by the person who's running in the area where they've got people who relate to them in the same way. And the whole theory here that we're working on is to get people to think like Shirley Chisholm did, saying, I'm not just for the black folk, I'm not just for the women, I'm for everybody. And if everybody would think like this, it would be a far better world. And she laid the groundwork for that based on what you read, Sister Baskin. So I'm just happy to be here. I was pulled in because I'm old, and they figure I know a lot more about what's going on. But I'm telling you from the heart how I feel about her representation. She was in another class, and you can tell that because there's nobody been near that since.
Right.
Huh?
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your great memory. Julia, do you feel a little weight on you that you're,
No pressure at all.
I think you said there's not many, representative statues of black women in Buffalo and very few by black women. I think the answer probably is there are no statues of black women unless the one in front of the museum, the library is up. But it's a lot. So what do you think about this? And do you feel like it's a little bit on you to make sure this comes out?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel that way. I feel pressure for it, but in a good way. I think pressure that's going to shape it to be the best that it can be. And I feel a little bit of that on every public project that I do, whether it's a mural or this project or even, work that I'm doing that I know particularly young children are going to see. Because I think there's something really important to be said there. Like, that next generation is going to be looking, and I hope 100 years from now, maybe what I'm doing isn't going to be special. I mean, that's the hope, is that it'll be commonplace. And if I do my job right, I think that would be the case. And just to kind of circle back, I'm also in education, so I think I can see where that kind of ties into those feelings of responsibility and representation. I think, again, you look at that generation that's coming up underneath you and you say, well, what do I do to leave the world a little bit better? Like, if I have my talent or I have, this thing that I do, how am I going to use that to really influence that next generation? And it's my responsibility to do the absolute best I can, especially with an opportunity like this, because I hate to say it, but I think sometimes the world looks at black women and kind of looks to wait for you to fail in some respects. So for me, it's just such a positive, beautiful, amazing thing to have just so many people supporting and looking at me, cheering me on to succeed.
That's wonderful. We're really excited, as we said before, about the outcome. Does anybody on the panel know anything about Arthur Hardwick, Shirley's husband? I'll confess, I had no idea Arthur Hardwick was an assembly member. He wasn't on my radar at all.
He was the first one to go to the assembly out of Erie County.
Yes, he was.
And he was a businessman, a very successful businessman. He was a liquor person. He had, like I told you, he had 3 small trucks, and they were running all down the living room. And so he got elected. He had community engagement and involvement. He wasn't of the same impressive. He was well-spoken, and he was intelligent, good, big, tall, good-looking guy, too. So that got him a lot of votes from the ladies. But he was representative of the district at that time, and probably cut his teeth on that as his first elective office, to my knowledge, and that was the assemblyman, and he served for 2 terms on that before Arif came along and won. And so after that, he kind of stayed in the background to Shirley Chisholm, was her supporter, and was just there. She was the star, and he was in a position where he was intelligent enough to understand that and supported every move she made to make her be the very best she could be without worrying about what his thoughts were, like some guys do when a woman gets to be the top.
It sounds like a very smart man.
It's a whole nother dialogue going on there, folks. It didn't happen to me, thank the Lord, but it's not easy, and I'd like to be in charge. But my wife, she was in charge after she found out my mouth was all that I really had.
But
Hey, Brother Bill, do you know who came
Can I say a word
before?
about Mr. Hardwick?
Sure
'Cause
thing,
I think it's
Doctor.
important, just from a very personal, stand, I read some rather candid interviews with Mrs. Chisholm about her husband. They were married in 1977. She was married prior to that to Mr. Chisholm, and they divorced shortly before she married Mr. Hardwick. But in 1982, he was in a car accident in which he almost died. He broke both his legs, both his arms, crushed his chest, and was in the hospital for 11 months. And then when he came home, he recuperated in a wheelchair for another 6 months. She was interviewed, that was about the time that she was exiting Congress, and said, for personal reasons, as well as some frustration she had with the whole system. But she told a reporter that each night when she went home, she prayed that she could get into her apartment before she started crying, because she was so overwhelmed with the near-death experience of her husband. And so I think there was a great love there, but, only at certain times or only in certain specific instances is there any indication of that. And, as we said, he was a person who was satisfied with being in the background and supporting her and dealing with his business.
It's an amazing insight. Fantastic history. So let's return to Julia. We have some representations here. I'm going to put one up. Could you tell us a little bit about the elements of the sculpture and how you were going to move forward?
Sure. So just to start off, we could talk about her posture a little bit. I tried to capture her in a way that I think represented her whole attitude that we've been talking about towards politics, being a person that was for the people. I didn't want to have her be very stiff and posed. I really tried to work to capture her, doing something that felt very casual, but still like really holding her own in that pose at the same time. The next part of it, I would say, is looking at the outfit a little bit. You can't really tell on this screen, but we spent a lot of time as a committee kind of talking about the pattern. One thing that I noticed about her was she had her own flair for all of her campaign outfits. I thought it was cool because I'm big into fashion. I was like, she's really, just going for it and doing her own thing. And I love the fact that she wore a lot of bold prints and patterns, and I thought that that'd be nice to really incorporate that and not just have it be flat, but kind of give that textural element. So the pattern that you see in this picture is not the final pattern we decided on. I'll keep it a surprise for when you see the statue. But know that it's good. It's very cool. And it's actually based on the outfit that she wore for her big speech in 1972.
Same outfit.
Same outfit. So it's not exact,
Yeah.
but there's elements there that we're pulling in.
Great.
And then the next part would be the medallion. So that's going to be a medallion from the Democratic National Convention from 1972. And then on the side there, the part that I think I'm most excited about is the folding chair. So that's a reference to her famous quote of, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I love the idea of bringing something like that in where, folding chair, I think we look at it as such a casual and simple thing, but I think it was such a powerful message in her quote, and I thought it was really important to include something like that in there and just really, hammer home all about who she was.
One of the things the committee was really looking for was to show fluidity, to show something in movement. And we all said we wanted that, but it's pretty easy to say in words.
Right.
But you really did capture an action figure, someone who was in Connecticut, in movement all the time, a kinetic person. And then the next picture is the clay figure, which does allow you to show more details.
So some of the details are changing. Again, that pattern that we see is not the final pattern we've decided on. I think that one's cool and funky too, but I like the one that we ended up with in the end. And you can see, I was really trying to look at the historic references and sort of look at what kind of glasses did she wear? What was her hairstyle like? And that was a big thing too as a committee that we really trying to find a balance with, because her hair, I like big hair, right? And her hair was big at times, but then it was really small at other times. So for me, it was exciting to kind of go through all of this material. Yeah, all the pictures and say what best encapsulates Shirley. And, thank you. I hope so.
I think you captured her posture too, because I remember always looking at her and thinking, this is a person of rectitude. If she was my teacher, I'm sitting up straight.
That's exactly.
She doesn't slouch.
That's exactly.
So you really did capture that without rendering her stiff in any way.
Thank you. I tried. And, I think for such a small statured woman, it's interesting to me that I think when you see those pictures of her, she really has this presence about her, Like you said, she'd make you sit up straight and pay attention.
I thought just by renderings and watching her through years, I thought she was 6'1", because she comes off as a power figure.
She's small.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Do you have anything else to add about the process or what you're doing here?
Right now, it's just exciting for me to be kind of going with the flow and, letting it develop and, just getting feedback from the committee. I'm so grateful to have this committee. I think they've really helped to guide me and give me a lot of valuable feedback to sort of steer it in the right direction. And I think Shirley would want, community surrounding something that's honoring her. And I think we've really achieved that here, having a community.
That's fantastic.
I like it.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So we have some, I'm sorry, yes, doctor.
Yeah, I just want to say, Julia mentioned the committee, but I want to thank Sean for the fact that he put together a committee that was inclusive. He gave us autonomy, allowing us to essentially, with the support of staff who are very knowledgeable and who, were enthusiastic, and it became a joint process. But I think that was crucial, to the implementation of this, to have had that kind of trust that the committee could really make sure that they implemented the vision that you had. And also thank you as an assemblyman, having secured the funding and having held on to it for these years, so that we actually are now going to be able to have this statue to commemorate the life of a woman that, really is a significant figure for all of us, not just for African Americans, but for all of us.
It really adds on, right, to, you can think of who's memorialized, right? I think of General Bidwell on Richmond Avenue was riding a horse.
Right.
We have Abe Lincoln in the park. We have, I don't know what presidents down around City Hall, and in the cemetery itself, Red Jacket, who's, really wildly important historic figures in that cemetery. So I think it's just so fitting, to have Shirley Chisholm in the place where, her final resting place, to memorialize, her there. And Forest Lawn means different things to different people, but it does have a history of what we would call an open cemetery. Most places there was a Catholic cemetery. There was a German Catholic cemetery, there was a French Catholic cemetery, there was a black cemetery, there was a Jewish cemetery. But Forest Lawn throughout its history has been an open cemetery, which was something not typical in Buffalo, certainly 100 years ago. So I'm really excited about the process and how the committee really functioned and came away with a project that the product is just better than I could have ever imagined. So really happy for that. Thank you for all. So we have.
I wanted to mention, just along those lines with statistics, and I meant to say this when we started, that we evaluated some statistics for another sculpture project about women that is happening locally. In the United States, only 8% of all sculptures are dedicated to women, and that's for public sculptures, so it's not specific to artwork by women, but only 8%, with only 394 across the whole country representing women. In Great Britain, that number is higher, but that's because of the Queen. So, the Queen and Alice in Wonderland. In Buffalo, 2%. There are 2 statues to women, and both of them, well, now there are 3. And Scott was reminding me too of Shasti O'Leary's sculpture, which I'm going to butcher the name, Scott.
No,
Mistake. Which just went in last year, but again, not representational like this is. So and then for U.S. national parks, of the 411 parks, there are 9 parks dedicated to women. So just for context, it's really a needed,
It's fantastic.
So.
Thank you.
Gross.
But thanks again to everybody. Many hands make light work on this job, and boy, are there a lot of hands in it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.